Chapter 8. "What's the matter?" Blake asked as Audrey opened the door Sunday morning. Audrey shook her head. It was a rough weekend. When I came to town, I had no money, so I had to ask my parents for help. They agreed, but only if I worked for my father and attended a dinner with them once a month. Friday was the first dinner, and needless to say, it didn't go well. "I'm sorry," he said, touching her arm. "What happened?" She bit her lip as she glanced up at him, wondering if she should tell him. She didn't want to hurt him, but if they were going to have a relationship, and she thought that's where they were heading, then she wanted to share everything with him. "My parents forbade me from seeing you because you don't meet their idea of what I should be dating. I left, but not before telling them I didn't need their money. But in reality, I do." The news that her parents didn't approve of Blake didn't appear to faze him in the least. Instead, he opened his arms and Audrey stepped into them, enjoying the warmth and security they provided. "It will be okay," he said, patting her hair. The simple touch felt like home, and she buried her face further in his chest. "How? I even prayed on the way home, but I haven't had any bright idea come to me." Her voice was muffled against his shirt, but he seemed to understand her anyway. "We'll figure something out." Audrey pulled back and looked up at him. "Unless it's the fact that you're a secret millionaire, I doubt it will change their mind." Blake said nothing, but a small smile pulled at the corner of his mouth. Audrey's eyes narrowed at him. "Are you a secret millionaire?" "Maybe not a millionaire," Blake laughed, "but I do have quite a bit of money to my name." "But if you have so much money, why are you working for my father?" Blake brushed a strand of her blonde hair back behind her ear. "I work because I like it, and because I don't want to end up one of those people who becomes attached to money and looks down on everyone else." Audrey snorted. "It's like you've met my mother." "I have," Blake said, "at the Christmas party last year. But I don't think your mother is bad. She's just missing something in her life." "What?" Audrey asked, her brow furrowing. Her mother was lacking for nothing, except for maybe decent civility. "God. All the money in the world means nothing if I don't have two things, God being the first." "What's the second?" Blake's hazel eyes stared into hers. "Love," he said as his thumb caressed her cheek. 1 Corinthians says, 3 things will last forever: faith, hope, and love. And the greatest of these is love. But if you don't have Jesus in your heart, it's hard to understand love." Suddenly, Audrey wanted to know Jesus the way Blake seemed to. She wanted the peace he exuded. "Will you teach me about love?" There was a double meaning in her words, and Blake didn't miss it. His eyes glistened as he nodded. "I would love to teach you about love." Then his eyes closed and his head lowered to hers, sending a tremor of emotion through her body as his lips pressed against hers. Her hand wound round his neck, her fingers locking in his hair. As his hands lowered to her low back, he pulled her closer to him, and the kiss deepened until the cry from Caden broke them apart. "I think he might be jealous," Blake said, brushing a finger across Audrey's lips. "But we need to get going anyway, or we won't make it to church." Audrey nodded. Any words she might have been able to respond with had left her head when his lips seared hers. 10 minutes later, they were pulling into the parking lot of the small white church. A large white steeple that held a bell rose from the left side of the building, and a single cross sat in the middle of the roof. Stained glass windows dotted the building, adding bursts of colors to the plain white siding. Blake grabbed Caden's car seat from the back and slung it over his left arm, leaving his right hand free to clasp Audrey's hand. When his fingers entwined with hers, she couldn't stop the smile that spread across her face. "Hello, Blake. Good to see you." A young man with dark hair and a bright smile greeted them as they approached the entrance. "Hello, Pastor Tom. It's good to see you again, too. Are you teaching today?" Yes, sir. Pastor Robert is taking a few weeks off. This is my friend, Audrey McAllister. Audrey, this is Pastor Tom. Tom's eyes widened at the name, and Audrey smirked. Yep, Bruce McAllister is my father. I'm sort of the black sheep of the family, I guess. Well, sheep of all color are welcome here, Tom said with a laugh. We will have to try to get your parents to join us. Audrey rolled her eyes. Good luck with that. Religion isn't their thing. But it wasn't yours either, remember? Blake said, squeezing her hand. That's true, but I think I was an easier sell than they will be. We'll keep praying regardless, Tom said, and we're glad to have you here today. Audrey followed Blake into the sanctuary, feeling out of her element. She couldn't remember the last time she had been in a church. Rows of chairs filled the open room, and a stage at the front held a piano, a drum set, and a few guitars. One large white screen hung on the wall at the very back of the stage. As Caden was awake, Audrey rescued him from the carrier after they sat down and held him on her lap. His eyes flicked back and forth as if taking the new environment in. The room filled quickly, and those who knew Blake came by and greeted him. Blake was careful to introduce her each time, but she knew she would never remember all the names. Perhaps after she had been coming a few weeks, they would stick in her memory. She paused at that thought. She had never planned to stay when she came home, but the idea didn't sound so bad now. When the music started, Audrey found herself swaying to the beat, though she didn't know most of the words. Blake sang beside her, his voice a clear, strong tenor. She'd had no idea he could sing, but she found she wouldn't mind hearing his voice every Sunday. After the songs ended, Pastor Tom took the stage. Audrey had no Bible, but Blake held his out so they could look at it together. When the words, "But the greatest of these is love," hit her ears, Audrey glanced up. Was it just an odd coincidence that the pastor was speaking on the very verse Blake had said to her this morning? Or was this God speaking to her? She turned to Blake, who smiled and nodded at her. As the pastor continued to speak, Audrey's heart called out to God, asking him to lead her, to change her, and to show her love. When the service ended, Blake took her to the diner for lunch. It appeared to be the hangout place after church on Sunday, as several other churchgoers ended up there as well. Audrey was glad Blake didn't call them over or ask them to join their table, though. It wasn't that she didn't want to get to know everyone soon, but she wanted a little time with Blake to decompress and discuss his plan for the next day. I'm so glad I got to know you, Audrey said as they opened their menus. I know it hasn't been long, but I feel like a different person now. Well, it's been a lot longer for me, Blake said with a smile. I've been waiting to be with you for years. Heat climbed up Audrey's face at the compliment. She couldn't believe this wonderful man had been in front of her all those years ago, and she had been too blind to see it. But you are a different person now. Accepting God into your heart changes you. Now we just need to get your parents and your sister together so we can see about changing their hearts too. Do you think it will work? Audrey asked. I can't see my mother ever giving up her money and leaning on Jesus. Well, she doesn't necessarily have to give up her money, but as for leaning on Jesus, I've seen tougher cases than your mother come around. Never doubt what God can do. Christmas is next week, and that seems to help with people's spirits too. We'll figure something out. Audrey nodded, but the doubt still rumbled around in her head. She wanted him to be right. No, she needed him to be right. But it would take a miracle to turn her mother around.